Welcome to Impact OC, the only program showcasing the people and organizations shaping Orange County. With your host, Don Camber.
Hello, live from the OC Talk Radio studios at UCI's Beal Applied Innovation Center. I'm OC Talk Radio Public Affairs Director Don Camber with another great guest positively impacting our community. Today, I welcome Epilepsy Foundation Orange County West Coast Regional Director Robert Ojeda. Epilepsy is the fourth most common neurological disorder in the world. Those living with epilepsy have surges of electrical activity in the brain, which can cause reoccurring seizures. The Foundation's mission is to lead the fight to overcome the challenges of living with epilepsy and to accelerate therapies to stop seizures, find cures, and save lives. Thank you, Robert, for being on Impact OC.
Thank you so much, John, for having me here today. I'm super excited to be here and share with you all the resources that we have available to all those living with epilepsy. So I'm truly honored to be here today.
And we're super honored to have you. Robert, please explain how the Foundation helps those living with epilepsy face the challenges associated with it to live to their fullest potential.
Absolutely. So the Epilepsy Foundation has been around for over 50 years, and our mission, like you explained earlier, is to find ultimately cures for those living with epilepsy. Having epilepsy is a very challenging disease because a lot of people feel the stigma of having epilepsy. Most people don't understand what epilepsy is. So what the Epilepsy Foundation does is provide the resources and the education to make sure that those living with the disease are able to lead a very successful life. We fund research to find cures for epilepsy. We provide support groups for those living with epilepsy. We also do special events in the community like walks, galas, conferences to provide a network for those that are living with the disease. A lot of our resources can be found on our website, epilepsy.com.
What is epilepsy?
Epilepsy, like you said, is a brain condition. Is basically the easiest way to describe it is having little short breaks in your brain that causes seizures. If you are diagnosed with having 2 or more seizures, that means you have epilepsy. Not every seizure that occurs is epilepsy. One of the big challenges that we do have is people being misdiagnosed with epilepsy. In order to have a diagnosis of epilepsy, you have to make sure you see an epileptologist that can really verify that you do have the disease. So it's a neurological condition. It doesn't discriminate of age, race, gender, and it can happen to anyone. There are some causes from epilepsy, like if you had a brain trauma when you were young, you fell and you hit your head, you're most likely to develop epilepsy. That's one of the causes. Other causes could be genetical. So if you have in your family people that have epilepsy, you're most likely to develop epilepsy. And other causes, we don't know what causes it. You can have a seizure, but like I said earlier, it doesn't mean that it is epilepsy. You can have a seizure if you're overstressed from heat, medication, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you do have epilepsy.
What does a seizure look like?
But seizures depend. So a lot of people are normally more, or they're aware of a seizure, so people convulsing on the floor. Those aren't the ones that are most common, but those people are the ones that people actually associate epilepsy with. So seizures come in different shapes and sizes. Having a seizure means sometimes that you can check out for 5 or 6 seconds and nobody knows that you had a seizure. In other cases, you can be convulsing on the floor, and those are the most severe types of epilepsy. Even though they're not the most common, that's what people normally associate epilepsy with. But epilepsy can be, you can be talking and all of a sudden you check out for 10-15 seconds. So that's epilepsy. Or you can shake and not be unconscious. So there's many different types of epilepsy. But most people associate epilepsy with you convulsing on the floor, and that's what the Epilepsy Foundation is trying to break that stigma, that yes, that's a type of epilepsy, but that's not the most common one.
How are they diagnosed?
Normally you have to be diagnosed by going to a neurologist first, and then you have to have 2 or 3 more seizures to be sort of considered to have epilepsy. But ultimately you have to see an epileptologist that can do a study on you, watch your seizures either at a hospital to get the diagnosis. So it's kind of a complex disease to diagnose. like I mentioned a little bit earlier, a lot of times people that live in rural areas might go see a general doctor or internal medicine or even a neurologist, and they're misdiagnosed. So we want to make sure that everybody that does have epilepsy actually has it. So it's important to see a neurologist and an epileptologist that can actually determine that you do have epilepsy. There are sleep studies, and then they can watch you in a machine that records your seizures, and that's the way you're diagnosed with epilepsy.
Now, if you get a treatment, will it prevent you from them having them during the day? Is that the purpose of treatments?
So treatment for epilepsy varies depending on the type of epilepsy. I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't really say which one is best. But most seizures, most people will outgrow the seizures. You can have a seizure or two and then you'll be fine. Other ones will require medication, and medication depends on the type of seizures that you do have. Some medication can be taken every single day religiously, and they can prevent the duration of seizures and the frequency of them. In other cases, medication does not prevent those seizures, and people have to have brain surgery, or there's some devices that can be implanted into your brain that can give like a brain stimulation when you're having a seizure that can prevent them from, having convulsive seizures. But it all depends on the type of seizure that you have, the severity. It's a very difficult condition or disease to treat because there's so many different variations of it. So most of the seizures are called focal seizures, and then they basically are when you, like I said, you can check out for 5 or 6 seconds. Your eyes might be blinking, but you're still conscious. Those are the most common ones. The ones that when you're unaware and you're shaking on the floor, those are the ones that people associate epilepsy with. And those are not the most common types of seizures.
What are some of the social concerns regarding epilepsy?
Yeah, so a lot of people that have epilepsy suffer a lot of emotional burdens, I would say. For example, if you are a young woman or a young man, 18 years old, and you're diagnosed with epilepsy, what that means is you probably won't be able to drive. They take your driver's license away because you can have a seizure when you're driving. A lot of people are afraid to be around someone who has epilepsy. As an example, let's say you start dating someone new, and then you tell them something about yourself, and you say, "Hey, by the way, I have epilepsy." Most of the time, there won't be a second date, or your friends don't want to be around you because they're afraid you're going to go into a seizure, and they don't know what to do with. So there's a lot of emotional side effects from having epilepsy. Most of the time if you have severe types of epilepsy, you have to have somebody with you at all times to help you. So if your parents are working now, one of them is going to have to stay home to tend to your seizures. People are afraid to be around you. A lot of people, they tell me that they're embarrassed to have the disease, so they hide. They don't want to share with anyone. It's not a disease where people are going to tell you, "By the way, I have epilepsy." It's not celebrated like other conditions are, where everybody rallies behind you. Epilepsy is one of those conditions that people want to stay quiet. Nobody needs to know. And culturally, for example, I'm from Chile, and in Chile, where I grew up there, people that had epilepsy were sort of told that they were from the devil, they were possessed, and so they were hidden. In a lot of the Latin American cultures, that's still the case. So we worked really hard at the Epilepsy Foundation to make sure that all that stigma is broken down, that yes, you have epilepsy, yes, you can still lead a very successful life, and you don't have to be ashamed of having this disease. So there's a lot of shame associated with it. A lot of people struggle with it because they don't want anyone to know, and when they do find out that you have it, or they know you have it, they shy away even more. So there's a lot of emotional side effects from the diagnosis.
But once you're diagnosed, are you going to live with it the rest of your life?
Yes. So currently there isn't a cure for epilepsy. Ultimately, I think the purpose of the Epilepsy Foundation is to find a cure, right? Like when somebody says to me, "My daughter got diagnosed with epilepsy," I always say, I'm fighting hard and I'm raising all the money and raising awareness so we can find a cure. However, there are amazing treatments that will help you manage the seizures. And like I said earlier, in most cases, seizures are mild and they can be treated with medication. Also, with diet, the keto diet has been known to be very effective with epilepsy treatments. Unfortunately, the keto diet is very difficult to follow, especially if you're a young kid and your brothers and sisters are eating chips and cakes and you can't because you have to be in a strict keto diet. So, but the keto diet is one of the treatments that is not a medication. But there are many, many different types of drugs that are available to you depending on the type of seizures that you do have. Now, in the event that the medication doesn't work, then there's brain surgery and there's devices that can be implanted into your brain that will help you manage the seizures. But like I said, it's a complex disease to treat. And that's why it's so important to go to a specialist that specializes in epilepsy. A lot of times, general practice doctors or internal medicine, they're not really equipped to really treat the condition.
So if a person has a seizure, they should be checked for that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do know is just because you have a seizure doesn't mean you have epilepsy. So 1 in 10 people will have seizures in your life. You can have a seizure from stress or from heat or medication, etc. It doesn't mean you have epilepsy. Epilepsy is diagnosed when you have 2, 3, or 4 more seizures in a row often. That's normally a sign that you do have epilepsy. But like I said, it has to be diagnosed by an epileptologist that knows about epilepsy. Now, I think that a lot of people think that just a seizure is epilepsy, but it's not. And so that's one of the things that I really want to make clear today, that if you have a seizure, it could be from stress. It could be from different conditions. So it's very important to seek the right provider that is able to diagnose you correctly.
And you were saying that a seizure could be in the form of a convulsion or just, quote, checking out.
Correct. Most of the seizures are sometimes where you're talking to somebody and they could be blinking like 5 times. That's a seizure. Or maybe their arm is shaking a little bit and that's a seizure. Other ones, they just pass out. And then the ones that are more severe are the ones that people normally observe in movies or they saw somebody convulsing. And those are the ones that unfortunately people associate epilepsy with. But most of the seizures aren't like that.
What are most seizures with epilepsy like?
Like I said, blinking your eyes, checking out for 5, 6
So it's
seconds.
not necessarily convulsions
Correct.
that you have epilepsy.
Correct.
It's more the, quote, checking out.
Correct.
Now, what is the proper seizure first aid?
Sure. So there's a couple of things about Seizure First Aid. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Epilepsy Foundation is doing to get people trained. A lot of people are very familiar with CPR, and you see it everywhere, right? They're required at business, airports, sporting events, gyms, airplanes, but it's not the same for seizures. So very few people are actually trained on what to do when somebody has a seizure. You don't see requirements at gyms or sometimes places of work or schools, airplanes. And so it's really important to educate the public on what to do when somebody has a seizure. First thing you need to do is to time the seizure. If it's longer than 5 minutes, it's considered a medical emergency. If it's not longer than 5 minutes, it is not a medical emergency. You don't need to call 911. A lot of times, a lot of people with epilepsy, they have a seizure, somebody calls, and then they're stuck with the ambulance bill, and it really wasn't a medical emergency. So when somebody has a seizure, there's 3 things you need to do. You need to stay with the person. You need to make sure that they're in an area that are safe. And then the third thing, most important thing, is to turn them on their side. Stay, safe, and side, the 3 S's. Stay with the person. You time the seizure. If it's longer than 5 minutes, it's a medical emergency. If it's not longer than 5 minutes, it's not. Make sure that they're in a safe space, clear the area, turn them on their side. You can put something behind their head. Never put something in their mouth. People cannot swallow their tongue. A lot of people have this they heard this somewhere that you're going to swallow your tongue. That's physiological impossible. You can bite your tongue, but that's just kind of part of having epilepsy. Never put anything in their mouth, nothing. Turn them on their side and just stay with the person until they're fine. If somebody is already known to have epilepsy, they normally have a medical card or bracelet that says, call this person or etc. So those are the things that are very important. The Epilepsy Foundation, last year, we trained 13,000 individuals through our free training program online on Seizure First Aid. We also trained 230,000 school personnel on seizure safe schools, because a lot of kids that go to school have epilepsy. And so it's very important that we train nurses, educators, and volunteers on what to do when a kid has a seizure. And like I said, most of the time it's not a medical emergency and they can come out of the seizure fine in a few minutes. Most seizures don't last more than 10-15 seconds.
But even when it happens, you're still going to be scared. So what do you do?
Well, like I said, number one thing you do is get trained and certified. So I think that's one of the things that we are advocating for, to get everybody certified on Seizure First Aid. When I first started working for the Epilepsy Foundation, I had no idea what to do if somebody had a seizure. And I thought, I'm going to call 911. But then the more I learned about it and the more educated myself is, like, yes, you will call 911 if somebody hits their head and when they fall and they're bleeding. Yes, obviously that's an emergency. But since I educated myself about what to do, then you stay with the person. Most of the time they don't remember they had a seizure, and you just wait it out. Normally it don't last more than 30 seconds and they will come out of it.
So how are you funded to help provide this information?
Sure. So we're funded by many sources of funding. So we work with the CDC. We get a grant from the CDC nationally to fund programs about epilepsy training, awareness, education. So that's one piece from the government. And number two, we are funded by individuals. Like, we have individuals that donate funds to either office, whatever office you're in. In Orange County, we have individuals that donate money to us. Companies. We also do special events, conferences, walks, galas, and all those funds are utilized for us to, number one, create more programs that are available to anyone, keep advocating on the Hill for laws that protect those living with epilepsy and disabilities in general. And three, also provide resources to them, like transportation, just a safe space for them to be in the epilepsy community. Epilepsy has been one of those diseases. There's about 3.5 million people in the United States living with epilepsy. And one of 26 people will be diagnosed with epilepsy. So it's pretty common, and it happens. I'm sure people that have epilepsy. And so I think it's really important to keep fundraising, to keep raising awareness, so that we can show that, yes, you do have epilepsy, but yes, you can still have a successful, fruitful life.
Could someone develop it sometime in their life? And what's the youngest age you can develop it?
I don't know what the youngest age would be, but I know children have epilepsy. Like I said, when you could be diagnosed at any age. I don't know specifically what the youngest would be, but I know that Chalk Children's Hospital here has been an epilepsy center, and the lead of the neurology epilepsy center is on our board. And there's a lot of young kids with epilepsy.
What are the long-term effects of epilepsy, such as thinking and memory?
Since I'm not a physician, but I do know that longest effects are emotional. People with epilepsy have dealt with a lot of adversity and rejection, so that's one thing. Emotional wellness is challenging for them. With any medication, if you take a medication throughout your life, there's side effects like with anything. So I would say that as well. And then the financial burden. I mean, a lot of our folks are underserved or maybe don't have insurance, so then the struggle of getting the medication is a challenge. I think there's financial ramifications as well as emotional. I would say the emotional piece is huge because if you are a young person with epilepsy, you can't drive. You can't go to like if you want to go to the mall by yourself, you can't. If you go to a party, everybody's going to be looking at you. Oh, he's going to have a seizure. She's going to have a seizure. So people are afraid to be around you. A lot of times, people are resentful because they're taking care of someone with epilepsy. Caregivers struggle because they're taking care of them. So it's a disease that it's challenging not only for the person dealing with epilepsy, but the caregiver as well. I think that Epilepsy Foundation is working hard to provide and educate people about what to do when you have a seizure. What are some of the resources? If you wanted to get trained in Seizure First Aid, Dawn, you can go on epilepsy.com, and we have all the courses are free. We don't charge for any of the courses. Support groups, if let's say you're a young adult or an elderly person that has epilepsy, we have support groups that are divided, I would say, by different demographics. So young adults, caregivers, middle age, and they're available to anyone at any time.
How can people help your organization?
Number one, by donating at epilepsy.com. That's number one. Funds result into research the funds into cures and better programs. I think number two, understanding what epilepsy is. And number three, getting Seizure First Aid certified. I think if you, would you know what to do if somebody had a seizure right now?
Well, now I would.
Yeah, but before me, you probably wouldn't, right?
No.
You would have called 911.
So you're going to try and make an effort to try to get information out, much like CPR?
Correct.
Because the rule is 5 minutes. If it's under 5 minutes, you don't need to call 911. It's
Nope.
just a seizure episode.
Correct.
But nonetheless, the person who's experiencing it, you're going to talk to that person and probably convince that person maybe to go see their doctor, right?
Absolutely. So there are two types of seizures, and so if you're newly diagnosed, let's say that I go into a seizure now, and you had no idea that I have epilepsy, right? And I probably didn't either. So was that epilepsy or was that a seizure? It could be because I was stressed to be here, or because it was too hot outside, or etc. So, but now if somebody does have epilepsy and they have a history, most of the time they will, if they will tell you, or somebody with them, they're normally people without, they're not by themselves because they can't. And so, but I think most people are afraid to sort of observe a seizure because it's, when you watch one, especially the ones that someone's convulsing, it's a lot, right? And you see the person sort of in a lot of distress and you don't know what to do. The number one thing you can do, and everyone listening, is don't panic, time it, make sure they're safe, turn them on their side, never ever put something on their mouth. They're not going to swallow their tongue. They can bite it. They will probably bite it, but that's part of the seizure. And then just wait it out. Most of the time when somebody comes off a seizure, I've witnessed a seizure just last Friday. I was at an event in Santa Barbara for the Epilepsy Foundation, and a gentleman had a seizure. And his seizure was he was just standing and he was checked out. But he was still there, but he didn't know he was checked out. And so I stayed with him for about 5 or 6 minutes, sitting down, and just make sure he's coming off the seizure fine. And then his mother said, yeah, normally they happen, a couple of times a day, but he just checks out.
Well, if a person has epilepsy, how many times a day could they have a seizure?
Sometimes 100, 200 times a day for the severe types. Other ones, it could be one time every couple of weeks. Like I said, it's a very difficult disease it's just every seizure is different. And so, yeah, some people have the severe types of epilepsy that do require, like I said, surgery, or they have just, multiple seizures a day. It doesn't mean that all the seizures are convulsing. It could be that you're checked out, that you just, you come in and out. But that's, like I said, the convulsing ones are not the most common ones.
What's the average length of time for a seizure if it's indeed 5 minutes or longer?
Well, 5 minutes or longer, that's a long seizure. So I would say that's like the max. I'm not a doctor, so I can't really say how much longer it would be, but most of them are not longer than 5 minutes.
So most of the time you don't need to call 911.
Correct.
And what is the youngest that a person could be educated on how to help someone else with a seizure?
I don't think there is obviously somebody who understands what to do when somebody, we've heard of kids calling 911, when somebody happened in their house, little kids. So I wouldn't say that there's necessarily an age, but I would say somebody that understands what it is. If I have a son that was 5 or 6 years old and I had epilepsy, I would make sure that he knows or she knows what to do if dad has a seizure.
Why don't you quickly explain the structure of what you oversee?
So I am the West Coast director of the Epilepsy Foundation. So and I'm also the local executive director for Orange County, the Greater Orange County chapter, which includes Orange County, Riverside County, Santa Barbara County, San Luis Obispo County, and Kern County. And so we're part of the National Office of the Epilepsy Foundation. The rest of California the Epilepsy Foundation are affiliates, which they use our name, but they have a separate 501c3. But we still have the same mission. So that would be Los Angeles County is basically Epilepsy Foundation of Los Angeles. San Diego County is Epilepsy Foundation San Diego. And Northern California has its own Epilepsy Foundation Northern California. They use our name and they have a separate 501c3, but the services that we provide are very similar for the exception of a few local things, but the mission is the same, to serve those living with epilepsy and to help them overcome obstacles of living with the disease. Also, I oversee the Washington, Alaska, Montana, Oregon, Arizona, and New Mexico offices for the national office. So I'm pretty busy, but I love the fact that, we're making an impact not only here in Orange County, Greater Orange County, because our area is not just the OC, but across the West. We work very closely with Los Angeles. We're neighbors, so we share a lot of the resources. And the Los Angeles office, Rebecca Holloway, the CEO of the Epilepsy Foundation Los Angeles, was very instrumental in helping California pass Seizure Safe Schools Act. So that requires schools in California to provide training to school personnel and teachers and volunteers in schools for kids that have seizures to be taken care of at school, just like CPR.
Thank you, Epilepsy Foundation Orange County West Coast Regional Director Robert Ojeda, for being on Impact OC. And I thank everyone for tuning in. I'm OC Talk Radio Public Affairs Director Dawn Camber. Have an impactful day.
You've been listening to Impact OC, the only program showcasing the people and organizations shaping our community. Right here on Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio.